Last time we learned about the basics to Marvel Villainous, all the villains that are at your disposal, and most of the objectives of how they work. This time we're going to get into part 2, to where we are going to learn about Thanos, and we are going to learn about events inside of Marvel Villainous. Hello everyone, Hobbyist here. We are back at it again with another board game tutorial guide. So this time we are going to be getting into the new components that I didn't cover inside of the beginner's guide to this game. This is going to cover a lot of areas to where if my tutorial video was helpful to you and you were able to grasp and put together the game and kind of just make it understandable and you're ready for that next step up, this video is going to be more so focused on the intermediate/advanced section of Marvel Villainous. But before we begin, make sure to hit that like button and to subscribe as well. Make sure to turn on that bell notification icon as well so you can get constant updates on the various forms of content that I have. For those of you who might not know, aside from board games, I also do anime and manga reviews. I also do character guides for another board game that I've got in Talisman. And I've got a whole bunch of other stuff coming this way. So definitely make sure to check all that out as well. But otherwise, let's go ahead and move on towards the setup. With this time, we are now including the Mad Titan, as well as the Goddess of Death, Hela. So most of the setup, if you remember from the beginner's guide, for when it comes to setting up a game, is still very much the same. You pick your villain, you grab their domain, decks, and all that sort of thing. So we'll just put Hela's domain across from us here. Grab Hela herself and put her on her side. She's got her own villain guide, as well as her reference card that she can use. I'll go over there. She's got her own deck that's going to go over there. And because Hela is in play, now the vault that generally carries the power tokens and the strength tokens also going to carry these soul marks that are needed for Hela's objective. So all of that is going to go right there in the middle. At the same time, depending on how many people you're playing with and how many villains you're going to be using, you arrange your fate deck to where only the cards that are tied to those villains are in it, in addition to the default cards that are going to be in the game, regardless of what villain is in play. So you work with that, and you place that in the middle. The biggest difference this time, however, is that now we've got events that would go into the same location as the rest of the heroes, the effects, and everything else that we talked about that a fate deck was going to consist of. So this is going to be shuffled right in. Now, when it comes to setting up for Thanos, it's pretty much the same as any other villain that you're going to choose from. You lay out his domain, you have your villain guide and your reference card, you have your own deck of cards, and then of course you get your hand of 4. The biggest difference, however, with Thanos, in particular, in comparison to the other villains, is that his objective is to collect the 6 Infinity Stones. And in order to do that, and to set him up before you commence a game, is that all 6 tiles, who are representing each of the Infinity Stones, go into a pile. They can be face up, but they have to be face up with the item side showing. Because on the back, it shows the specialty side. So, regardless of the order, they just simply go in a stack right beside the fate deck. And, of course, you conduct your movements as normal. You distribute the appropriate power to the number of players that you are playing with, and you take your usual turns. When it comes to Thanos, inside of his particular deck, the way that he is able to complete his objective in collecting the stones is that there is an effect card in his deck that is known as Consult the Well. This is going to be the only time inside of this particular video that I'm going to go into specific cards because it affects the rest of the gameplay when it comes to how you're operating inside of the turns and the steps and all that sort of thing. So this Consult the Well card is what's going to distribute the stones from the stack to any other domain that isn't his own. And Thanos' whole objective, whenever you shuffle and pick one at random, let's say that it was the Time Stone that we picked. And the Time Stone goes in any domain that isn't our own. It could go into Hela's. We're playing with either Ultron, Taskmaster, or Killmonger who are beside us. We can throw them in there. And the way that these items work is that prioritize attaching them to allies that are in foreign domains. If not, they simply just go in the bottom half of the enemy players, as if they were the ones who played the card. And then the rest of the tiles go down to their stack as per usual. What the Consult the Well card then says, after you have determined which domain and which location the stone is going to be at, it says that you are then allowed, for any allies that you have out, to then move one of them to that location that has the stone. And each of the members of the Black Order that Thanos has as his allies have different abilities in regards to how they can combat other characters, as well as if they are the ones that are going to be invading in order to retrieve the stones. So therefore, with our Black Swan here, it now plays as a card that goes on the top half and is like an obstacle for heroes. But now you are the one that takes the advantage. So it then hops over to where the stone is going to be located, and then we move on from there. The only way that you are able to retrieve the stones and return successfully is if you are able to use the relocate actions, and then not only can you relocate any of your allies in your own domain, you can then control them in their domain that they are currently occupying. So Black Swan can also be controlled and relocated to any of the invading domains that she is currently in. Of course, with the way that combat works, if you remember that, you simply need both to either match the ally in question or to be greater than, and then you sacrifice the cards. But just for this example, let's say that with Black Swan, she was equal to the enemy in question, which is what her ability says. So she's got a matching strength of 3. So all that simply means is that we would only have to sacrifice Black Swan to Thanos' discard pile, and then the enemy in question to the discard pile as well. With the remaining allies that Thanos has left, they then take the stone. And the only way for the stones to then come back to Thanos' domain is for Thanos to then find another relocation action in order to successfully pull the ally that has the Infinity Stone attached to it back over to its side. Once the ally in question has returned from the opposing domain with an Infinity Stone, then the Infinity Stone flips from its item side over to its specialty side, and it operates as a specialty card for the rest of the game and sits right in your specialty area. Thanos' Infinity Stones are the only specialty items that do not require power to be used every single time. Therefore, because of the activation symbol that was on it, all it takes is an activate action and you can use any one of your Infinity Stones. Because remember, for each action type that is at a space, it's the number of times that it appears that you then are able to use that activate. So you can only activate one if there's only one at that location. Or if there's more than one activate, then you can do it that many times, and you can use the combinations of various different stones. And then, pretty much the rest of your time as Thanos, your whole goal is to then play your allies, find the Consult the Wells, and then be the one to then distribute the stones to everybody, send your allies over, get the stones, and pull them back. To where then, once you have all 6 Infinity Stones, you then won the game. The other cards that need to be showcased inside of this video, aside from Thanos' objective and how it complicates the way that you play, as far as Thanos being able to evade other domains, and it affects strategies of every other villain, there's also these event cards that I left out in the last playthrough. Now, events are always going to classify into 2 different areas, as far as how they function and what it is exactly that you can do with them, whether it be for benefits, but more times than not, the events themselves are going to be hindering, as there are global events, which are simply just events that affect everybody that's playing the game. This can happen anytime Fate cards are pulled, because these are going to be shuffled in the Fate deck, and it simply tells you what the limitation is for everybody. But, however, you can see that there is a strength marker in the corner, which I'm going to get to in a second. The other kind of events that exist are targeted events. And these events specifically, if you use your reference card to recognize the logos, are specifically targeted towards that specific villain. So that's the obstacles that they themselves run into. So with this one is a Taskmaster targeted event, so it's going to hurt Taskmaster more than anybody else. There's one for Killmonger, one for Ultron, one for Thanos, and one for Hela. Whenever an event that is global is active, inside of the intermediate difficulty level, there can only ever be one event, one global event, in play at a time. Meaning that if you go through the Fate deck again, and you pull the next global event, then that global event replaces the previous event and is what's currently active. And then the targeted events work not in the same way as the global events, because they are specifically targeted towards a villain. Therefore, if a targeted event is being drawn and there's a global event in play, it doesn't really matter, because it's going to then work with targeting and harming that specific villain. And the global events and the targeted events stack. Whenever you really master the game, when you're really looking for something that's super duper challenging inside of the undying mode, then all that simply is that if you have somehow, if you get crazy enough, all 4 global events played, then they're all active at the same time, and you have to fight through all 4 events at the same time, with all the consequences, with everything that is happening, and it makes it ridiculously harder to get through the game and to be able to successfully complete your objectives, because you have more that it's hindering you. However, regardless of how many events that are in play, there are ways for both targeted events and for global events to be eliminated to the discard pile. So looking at the 2 events here in question, just as examples, the event to the right is a global event, and the event to the left is a targeted event. And as we can see in the bottom left-hand corners, both those events have strength, meaning that instead of just, especially with Thanos in play, having the option to relocate allies to either the opposing domain, anywhere in your own domain, you now have the ability, only with global events, then attach allies to them as well. And they are what you are using to team up and sacrifice in order to either match the strength of the global event or to exceed the strength of the global event, and then that goes away. Every single event, regardless of whether it is targeted or whether it is a global event that affects everybody, has rewards for you getting rid of them. And they could definitely play into your favor. So I highly encourage, if you are able to take out global events, to do so, because those rewards could be the difference in victory or defeat. But with targeted events, because they're targeted specifically towards a villain that matches the logo on the card, no other villain can go after that specific targeted event because they're the only ones who are affected by it. So the global event and the targeted event, let's say we were playing as Taskmaster instead of Thanos, and this was our situation, then it perhaps could prove fruitful to then first get rid of the targeted event, then do the global event, because we're the only ones who can interact with these kind of events and get the rewards that are in question from those targeted events as well. So that adds just another layer of complexion. So on top of heroes trying to stop you from the Fate deck, there are events that are trying to stop you and to hinder you, and you have to then prioritize whether it means getting rid of the events, getting rid of the heroes. It just adds a bit more layers of complexity if you're looking for an additional challenge, additional setbacks to where now you have to look at your cards and go, okay, which one of these am I trying to play to my domain? Which one of these am I trying to play towards the events? Which one am I going to use to stop Thanos' forces from acquiring the stones? Which forces am I going to then use to take out heroes so that way I can free up more actions? It's just adding more layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of difficulty. And honestly, difficulty can be a good thing. Like I said before, if you're trying to step up your challenges, step up your gameplay, create more excitement, create more scenarios to where you have more to think about, then this is the way to go. So definitely, if you feel that you have a greater grasp, try out those intermediate and advanced levels. The intermediate is more so of your normal gameplay. So that would only include the events. If you want to play as Thanos to add another layer, you can. And the targeted events are going to be in there as well. The only way that this gets really hard, as I mentioned before, is if you play to where you can have more than one global event going on at the same time. But other than that, this is the additional pieces that are going to come inside of your game of Marvel Villains. So with Thanos complicating the way that you operate as a player, and with events either going to hinder you greatly or provide beneficial rewards, these are the extra components to Marvel Villainous to elevate your gameplay and to kind of think a little bit more. The next step up from this that I would say, if you guys are interested in this at all, please let me know down in the comments below, is to get the one expansion that adds not one, not two, but 3 new villains. And it is called the Mischief and Malice expansion to Marvel Villainous. And it is going to contain the villains Loki, Madam Mask, and MODOK, each with its own separate sets of objectives, different set of cards and mechanics, and additional pieces that you can add to add more layers on top of that. So then you could complicate your game a little bit more, because then you got to figure out, well, what is Loki going to be able to do? And how does he affect the rest of the game? What is Madam Mask going to be able to do? What is MODOK going to be able to do? Are any of their mechanics going to cross over into the game that we have now? To where if Thanos is in play, you now then have to worry about Thanos invading certain areas and how you're going to meet their objectives. Are there any obstacles inside of Mischief and Malice that are going to be affecting the rest of the game? And then on top of all that, you then have the events and the targeted events that are going to play a role on everybody, and it's going to cripple you. And then It's got to figure out how to get through the steps of each of the various individual objectives that the villains have in order to win the game. It's a lot. I'm not going to lie. But let me know if this is the next step that you guys want to take down in the comments below. But otherwise, I thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.